Hello, my name is Alfred Bielik, more commonly known as Al Bielik. Original family name is Edward Cameron. I have been involved in the Philadelphia Experiment, the Montauk Project, time travel, alien connections of the Montauk Project, and some other projects, all of which have been secret over the years, most of which have never been declassified. I wound up in the 28th century, and this was in a time period of 2749 to 2751 AD. Talk about changes in civilization, society, and everything else. It was drastically changed from what we saw in 2137, as this is now 600 years later. The cities were enormous, the cities were beautiful. They had ground-based cities, much as we have always had them, but they also had something else, floating cities. Floating cities, due to anti-gravity techniques being perfected sufficiently that they could float an entire city, which was perhaps not as large as any of our current cities. It was round, or very nearly round, but it floated on this platform and they could move the city any place they wanted, remaining floating in the air, 4,000 or 5,000 feet above the ground perhaps, or a little less, depending on what they wanted. But the size of the city was vertical rather than horizontal, 2,200 stories high. That's about 2.5 miles. These cities could move anywhere on the planet. Basically, they stayed hovering and floating. If they didn't like a particular location, they moved somewhere else. There wasn't that much traffic in moving cities, I can assure you, because the world population in that era, the 28th century, was only 500 million, and I was instructed later that was where they had held it for centuries. There would be no more than approximately 500 million population. Some of the features of this, let's start from the political standpoint. As I learned, all of these cities, whether they're ground-based cities, which the majority were, because they had to do manufacturing, they had to have agriculture and various other things to supply the needs of civilization. But all of them, whether floating or ground-based, were rather interesting in their governmental form. They had essentially no government. There was no government as we know it today. There was no money, there was no banks, there was no political jurisdictions, and there was resolved down to what would be best called a city-state structure, where the city is the state, and any other cities from that one are independent and operate in their own independent manner. So that was the major change there. There was no elected government, there was no appointed government, there was no government as we had ever seen it in the past. As I found out, each city was run by an intelligent computer, synthetic intelligence, synthetic consciousness, a highly radioactive crystalline structure. Who built them, I had no idea. Nobody seemed to know, but they've been there for hundreds of years. And this computer ran the entire city. There were guidelines set down, there were law books, but no courts. There were guidelines set down as to how you're to behave, what your parameters were. Within these parameters, anything went. Anything was not considered kosher within this realm, this parameter limit, would be expressed as a yellow zone, i.e. a zone that you don't want to go into and you don't want to become involved in that type of behavior. If you got out into that area, you were given an invite for a reprimand to the computer, which there was one in every city, running each city. You would literally be called in for, shall we say, an interview or an audience with the computer, and you would be advised that you had broken the law, but it wasn't considered a felony, it was a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor and such. If you were judged guilty, you were sent off to one of the work camps for whatever purpose they did in the work camps. Very much like today, I presume, where any kind of labor, menial or otherwise, had to be done was done. And that was compulsory, that was not voluntary. If you were called in because you had gone outside the yellow zone into what is called the red zone, which is basically what you would today call a felony offense, you were immediately called in for an interview. You were examined, looked at, talked to, and if the computer at that point thought that you were rehabilitable, that you could learn again to be sociable and within the social bounds of normalcy, you were given one more chance. If the computer decided that you were not capable of fitting into society, you were terminated right then and there. Now, there were other people who didn't feel like they could fit into the society, but had not yet committed any of the so-called offenses. Literally, they were allowed to leave. The word was, if you don't like it here, go live somewhere else. Go out in the boonies if you want, live as a hermit. We don't care. And many did. I do not know what percentage. I was told that quite a lot of people had left the cities and gone out in the boondocks. Whether they formed communities or not, I never did find out. If you weren't required to work, which no one was required to, other than their social obligation, which was well inculcated into the kids, that you had an obligation to contribute to society, to pay for what you have been using and had inherited, for which no money was involved. A sort of credit system was still functional, but otherwise, except for fairly large credit purchases, if that is the right term, they didn't really keep track of very much. It was considered quite free as long as you were able to make some contributions and nobody overloaded the system with demands. That happened very seldom, that there was an overload of demand for goods or services. So as a result of that, there was very little abuse of the system. Now, in this period of time, talking with many people, making friends, I had a number of questions. Who built this computer system? That was my first and foremost question. Who maintains it? What happens when it breaks down? Very common questions. No common answer. Very much uncommon answers. First question about the cities, who built them, who maintains them, who maintains the computers, was rather hard to answer and get an answer to. No one really knew much about the history of the construction of the city or how it ran, other than the computer, and you couldn't request an interview. You couldn't request to go in and ask questions. The aspect of how these computers communicated with each other was unknown, but it did make, the one I talked with did make a number of interesting statements over a period of time. They had been around for about 250 years in this format and this system.